was listening to pretty interesting talk, and I just thought that it's actually really relevant to cyberpsychosis. So this is just a page I was reading from earlier. And lastly, this is the talk. It was actually between Dr. Jordan Peterson, a clinical psychologist, and Dr. Andrew Huberman. And I kind of thought, could cyberpsychosis be real? And this is what they're going to say. Okay, let's have a little listen, guys.
Because I was going to come to this later, but I think it's relevant now. If somebody has a lesion in their dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, or if you transiently inactivate it with a technology, a non-invasive technology like transcranial magnetic stimulation, they can now just put a magnet on outside the skull and quiet that area of the brain transiently. In animals or humans, what you find is that person or human becomes incredibly accurate at any motor task. So for instance, if I were to give you a shooter game where you're supposed to shoot targets and you're shooting targets, you'll have some hits and some misses, like anybody. If I inactivate your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, your accuracy goes through the roof. It's near 100%. But the one thing you can't do is decide whether or not you're shooting an enemy or a friend. So you can no longer establish rules. You just become very good at execution of the motor behavior. Similarly, in an animal or person without a dorsolateral prefrontal cortex.
You see a trade-off there, right, between specificity and flexibility.
That's right. And so we see this theme over and over again, where as a purely sensory motor response machine, the prefrontal cortex isn't even necessary. In fact, if you get rid of it entirely, people become like machines. If I click over here, somebody has no prefrontal cortex, basically everything becomes a stimulus. A puppy, everything's a stimulus. I used to have a bulldog. When he was a puppy, he had to worry about leaving cords out and everything went into his mouth. By the time he was, a year old, in part because he was a bulldog, he just kind of lay there. Like you could put a toy in front of him and he wasn't into playing and just leave it alone. A baby, everything's a stimulus. Many adults become infant-like in their responses, right? When anxiety is high. In fact, I have a friend who's a psychologist. Tell me if you agree with this statement or not, that anxiety makes children of us all. I don't know if that's true or not, but certainly has been my experience that when feeling anxious, I don't struggle with chronic anxiety, but I certainly have felt anxiety.
Well, it simplifies us. I mean, all these underlying emotions and motivational states, these primordial instincts, are simplification mechanisms. And so if we're unable to compute a complex and sophisticated pathway forward that takes multiple variables into account simultaneously, we can't just do nothing. We're going to default to a more primordial and direct state. And then you might say the whole panoply of emotions and motivations lies there at the weight for us to grip our behavior if we're paralyzed by inability to choose between multiple options. And so we do, to the degree that we're simplified by an emotion, then we're reduced to something more approximating an infantile state. If you watch 2-year-olds, and 2-year-olds are particularly interesting in this regard, they basically just cycle through innate motivational states. It makes them really interesting to be around because when they're interested in something, they're 100% interested in it.
Anyway, guys, I'll stop the talk there, but I kind of found it really, really interesting that if you turn off that region of the brain, then people's accuracy becomes incredibly advanced. And it's kind of makes sense because a lot of the very basic brain function is very, very quick. I don't know if you've ever dropped a glass and you can grab it almost instantly. You don't consciously think about this. It's a kind of autonomic response. And we've all kind of got this. And anyway, I kind of thought this was an interesting tie-in with Cyberpunk, simply because they kind of mentioned that turning off this area of the brain increases someone's accuracy massively, but prevents them from seeing who is actually an enemy and who's a friend. Anyway, guys, I thought that was an interesting tie-in. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I will speak to you guys soon.